Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with a really bright and fun project today, and it's this beautiful Moda Flows Basics summer picnic quilt. So this is a lovely range of fabrics we've got here in the shops, and I was asked, would I do something with them? So I went down and selected 5 fat quarters. This colourway is called magenta, this is violet, this is herb, and this is leaf, and the centres, the yellow, is called buttercup. And they're really nice blender fabrics that we've got here. Now for this whole picnic quilt, I used 5 fat quarters. Now just a note for our US viewers, because we're based in the UK, our fat quarters are cut, if they're cut from the bolt, on a metre, so it's 1/4 metre of fabric. So my fat quarters measured 22 by 20 inches. If you're in the US, your fat quarters will more likely be 22 by 18. That will affect a little bit when you come to do the borders, but I'll cover that when we get to that bit. But just a sort of word of warning for that. But basically this was 5 fat quarters and 30 inches, 3/4 metre of a background fabric, and that made the whole of this quilt top. So without further ado, let's have a look how to make this flower block. So I always start with the centre block, and for the centre block I'm going to be using the buttercup, like I say, and this is gorgeous fabric. Let me just put it under the close-up actually so you can see it in a bit more detail. And to me it almost looks like the effect you get when you salt dye things. You get this really nice pattern, so it sort of reads as solid, but it's got a little bit more interest, and it's just absolutely beautiful. The colour in it is just really vibrant and lovely, so I absolutely love it. So I'm just going to cut myself a 4.5 inch square. I've made a 4.5 inch strip. Now I'm deciding I'm going to do it from this end that's got a bit more of that vibrant colour in it. So as I said, this is a 4.5 inch strip. So I'm just going to cut myself a 4.5 inch square. And I really like this yellow. Hence I chose it, or why I chose it. So I'm just going to put that over there out the way. And then the other thing for the flower centre, what we're going to need is 4 1.5 inch squares. I'm going to snowball the corners. Now this is the violet colourway. The pink I've used in there, I think I said already, is called magenta. And I think they just both work really well in this quilt. As soon as I saw the fabrics, I was thinking, yeah, that's just summertime on a bolt of fabric. So we're just going to do 4 little 1.5 inch squares. And then I'm going to snowball the corners of that 4.5 inch square. Now, you can either do it the sort of way, if you haven't got any sort of specialist cutting rulers, you can just draw the line, and I'm actually going to do this 2 different ways. So let's do 2 corners just with the drawn line. But also, if you've got the folded corner clipper, you can use the folded corner clipper. So the way to do that is you take your 1.5 inch square. I'm actually going to place it right side down. And because I know that's a 1.5 inch square, I'm going to line up, let me get this right in under the close-up. I'm going to line up that 1.5 inch line on that square. And it means we're just going to trim off that little bit there. Which means when we take that to the sewing machine, I can just do my normal 1/4 inch, and that will put that triangle on that corner to snowball that corner. So if you've got the folded corner clipper, that's ideal. Now sometimes I use half square triangles with the folded corner clipper, but these are quite small, so I tend to use the squares. And I think it was one comment we had actually when I was demoing the folded corner clipper, and I think somebody said, Jeanette, you're supposed to put squares into the corners. You can, but to save fabric, I quite often, if they're larger, I will quite often just put a half square triangle on. Actually, let's just do that one with our folded corner clipper again. Oh, I've drawn the line. Let's do one that hasn't got the line drawn on it. But you could see there actually, let me just do that again and just pin that one on. Because you can actually see, if I place my folded corner clipper on, that line is right under where I've drawn it. So that's the 1/4 inch. So when we sew and trim a 1/4 inch away, that's the same process basically. But I find with the folded corner clipper, it's a bit more precise. They just tend to go in a little bit neater. When you do it this method with the drawn lines, quite often you might have to trim a little bit to get your block back to size. Oh, that's a bent pin. So let's do 2 corners. Now the point to watch on this is just that all your lines always point in towards the centre of the block. So on those 2 where we've drawn the line where we haven't got the folded corner clipper, we're going to sew on the line, and for these we can just do with 1/4 inch. So let's take those to the machine and sew. Right, I'm going to start on my little starter scrap just because they're quite small pieces and it will stop the needle from pushing the fabric down into the throat plate. So there it is. Now I'm just going to trim away the excess fabric here, and that just reduces the bulk. So that's our centre block. Now if you want to get that to lay a little bit flatter, you can give that a little bit of a spritz with the best press, and that works really well on that. So that's the centre square done. So we're going to have a look at making the what I call the petal units, and it's going to end up looking like that. So what I'm going to need for this is a 4.5 inch square and 8 of our 2.5 inch squares of background fabric. I've got mine cut here, but I do need to cut my square out. And this once again is a 4.5 inch strip. I love this colour. And once again, we can do the same. We can either do that where we draw our line on the back and add it. So let's do that one first. And now we need to put one side on, and then we come back and put the second side on, and the second side we'll do with the folded corner clipper again. So I'm going to start with that side. Now I've got my other 3 made, so I just need to make one for you. So I'm going to take that to the machine and sew on that line again. Now once again on this, you could either put a square on, but for me that wastes a little bit of fabric. So to save a little bit of my background fabric, what I tend to do is trim, and because this is a bit of a bigger square, it works a bit better. I'm going to trim at 2.5 inches, because that's the size of the square we're putting on. So I'm lining up the 2.5 inch mark on the folded corner clipper on the edge there, and I've got my flat tip at the top. So I can now cut off that. And I've actually got a 2.5 inch half square triangle here, which will just fit perfectly into that space there. And like I say, that just means that we can get a little bit more efficient cutting from our fabric, because instead of losing sort of that amount from each of our squares, we can just add half square triangles. So we get a few more from our strips for that. So I say, it just makes our fabric go a little bit further. And I'm going to sew that on with a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to start on my starter scrap again. So all I need to do now is just cut off that dog ear. And then we've got our petal block made. So you're just going to make 4 of those. So I've got the other 3 here. And I can begin to lay this out so you can begin to see the block coming together. I'll leave it up here. So we now just need to do these 4 squares, which are our leaf corners. Now what you're going to need for those are 2 half square triangles. Actually, if I bring one in that you can see that I've already done. So we've got 2 half square triangles here. Now with the purple, I use the dark green, and with the pink or the magenta, so this was violet, I used the leaf colour, the lighter green. So we're going to make 2 half square triangles, and then we're going to put this together as a 4 patch. So I've cut some half square triangles from my green and my background. Now you could do this from squares, 2 at a time method, and if you're going to do the 2 at a time method, it would be 3 inch squares. You should have sufficient fabric to do that in both the greens and the background. And I actually can use my little folded corner clipper because this cuts half square triangles as well. So, but we'll just cut. So I'm just lining up the 2.5 inch, and we can make some half square triangles. from that. So I just need to put together 2 for this. So let's take those to the machine and give them a sew. So that's our 2 half square triangle blocks made, and we just do them so they point towards each other. And in this bottom corner, I'm going to put my flower colour. So for me, that's the magenta. And then in that top corner, we're going to put a background square, and I'm just going to sew that like a 4 patch. So I always do right on to left. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down both sides. And then I'm going to press my seams under the squares of fabric. Okay, so that's all our bits made for the block. So it's really nice and simple, and it comes together really quite quickly. So let me just pull this a bit closer, and then we can lay out all the pieces. But it's really effective. So these now we just place so that that violet, this fabric is square, goes into that flower centre, and that's the block. So we're just going to sew that together like a giant 9 patch basically, but I absolutely love this block. So we're going to go right on to left. We're going to sew all the way down here, and then we're going to add our 3rd pieces and then put that whole 9 patch together. I'm going to press my seams. I think I'm going to press towards the petals. I think that's how I did it. And then all the seams will nest. So there it is, there's our block all sewn. So I'm just going to take that to the iron and give it a press. So there it is, absolutely beautiful block, absolutely love it. It's a little bit forgiving because you've got so much of the colour in the centre. If your points don't exactly match, you don't really see it. So close enough is definitely good enough for this one. But I absolutely love that. That's a fantastic block. Just really beautiful colours in that, really beautiful colours. So shall we have a look now at the quilt again, and I'll talk a little bit about the borders. So that's how I made the flower blocks. Like I said, I did 2 in the purple, which is the violet colourway, and 2 in this lovely bright pink, which is the magenta. And then I decided I was going to put a checkered border. In my mind, I was seeing a checkered border on this rather than something solid, and I think that just helps with the brightness. And how I did that is I just took some of my remaining fat quarters and I cut them into strips. And then I sewed each of the fat quarter strips to a strip of the background. So let me just show you how I did that, and then I cut them into 2.5 inch pieces, and it just sped up the process of doing that checkerboard a little bit. So let's just quickly do that. So once I'd sewed my 2 strips together, I did 2 of the yellow strips from the fat quarters, 1 of the purple, 1 of the pink or violet, magenta, 1 of the herb, 1 of the leaf. Yeah, and that was it. It was 6. It was 6 in total, and 2 of them were the yellow. And then I just cut them into 2.5 inch pieces, like so. And then I just started to lay them out around the outside of the 4 flowers once I put that flower centre together. And what I did, and let's just bring this in so that you can see that. Let's just put that right out of the way. So we've given ourselves a bit of room here. Is I started with a yellow. So I did my sides first, or my top and bottom, and then added the sides down. So I went yellow, pink, then a green, then a yellow, then the purple, then a dark green. So I was using twice as much yellow as all the other colours basically. And that just made sure that all of the fabrics I had left from the fat quarters went a long way. And it also helped bring that yellow from the flower centres out into the outside of the quilt a bit more and really lifts the colour. So I just did a placement, and when I had it in one order on this side, I just did the reverse order in this side so it looked balanced, so you didn't end up with all of one colour in one area. But you can really just lay them out, anything that's pleasing to your eye. But by doing that and using the 2 strips of the yellow, as I said, it meant that I had enough fabric in all of that to do that checkered border with those fat quarters. And I still had some strips left. So I also used the remaining strips for the outside borders. Now each of these were 36.5 inches long. And if you can sort of see, I did it something I call chasing my borders on. And if you have a look, we'll put a link to it. I've actually got a tutorial where I show you how I do that. But it just meant that it just distributed those colours around that really evenly. Now you'll see from that, I didn't use the dark green. I went for the lighter colours in the border and the outside border. But this is where I put the warning at the beginning. For our US viewers, because our fat quarters are slightly bigger, I ended up with an extra strip of the magenta and the violet because I had 20 inches to work with. Now, if you've only got 18 inches to work with, you won't have this final strip. You'll have a part strip left, but you won't have 2 strips of the magenta or 2 strips of the violet. Now you could substitute a green in for that or use some of the other colours a little bit more or just buy a little bit of extra fabric for those. But because we used a bit more of those colours in the flower centres, there wasn't quite as much for that. So that's just the difference between the different sizes of fat quarters you just need to bear in mind. So I just added some 2.5-inch strip sashings with the yellow cornerstones, and everywhere where I had a yellow with that sashing, I made sure that there was a yellow in the checkerboard borders, and that just also helped to balance all the colours out. I've just quilted it very simply, just with a diagonal line, and I've actually used, I'm going to do this under the close-up, I've actually used a very pale yellow thread. That tends to blend in more, particularly on the dark colours, than a white would have, or a very light coloured fabric. So I used pale yellow, but pale green or even the pale pink in this would have worked equally well. So I really had so much fun making this quilt. I absolutely loved it. Let me show you the back, because I actually used a Moda Bella Solid on the back, and this colourway, I believe is called Dill, and it just reminded me of, like, you know, summer lawns. So we did that, and I used the same in the binding, that same Dill. I tried the dark green, but it was just a bit too much with that Moda Flow Basics in the binding as well. I just felt that the plainer binding on it just gave it a little bit more of a border and a little bit more of a frame. So it was 1 metre, 40 inches for the backing fabric, and you need 4 width of fabric strips for the binding. So I bought 10 inches of that for that as well. So that's it. The finished size is approximately 38 inches square. Absolutely love it. It just reminds me of summer. Just absolutely beautiful. So I was pleased I got given the challenge. Can you go and do something with those fabrics and make something? Because I just had so much fun. Like I say, it was a joy to work on. So I hope you liked it. I hope you give it a go. And if you do, please do share your photos with us, whether you do it in this colourway or whether you choose a colourway of your own. Tag us on Instagram and Facebook, and then we'll get to see those pictures. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the Sewing Studio.